Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. I'm your host, Brooke Mitchell, and today's webinar is Hidden Yellowstone and the Tetons, the Nat Hab Way, presented by Nat Hab Expedition Leader Jake Richards. Thank you so much for being here today, Jake. Over to you.
Hey, thanks for having me. Hey, everybody. I'm excited to be back talking about Yellowstone again. I may have seen some of you last week. I did a webinar on our spring and fall trips, and today I'm going to be talking about our summer trip, our Hidden Yellowstone and Grand Teton Safari. Um, our Daily Dose of Nature webinars, if you're not familiar, they cover a lot of different topics regarding some of the places that we visit. Today, we're going to be doing what we call a know before you go. So this is a little bit more about the nuts and bolts and logistics of the trip. Some of you may have booked this trip already and want to get a little bit more information, or maybe you're interested in booking the trip and you want a little bit more information. So that's what I'm here for. So it's going to be a little less about the natural history because we talk about that at length on the trips. This is going to be a little bit more about the details. So let's get started. All right, a little bit about me. Like Brooke said, my name is Jake, Jake Richards. I'm originally from Vermont. I have a couple of degrees in history and environmental science that I got back in Vermont. And when you get a degree in history, you become a forklift driver. And that's what I did for about a decade. Lived in Vermont about the first 30 years of my life before moving west. I moved west when I got into the Teton Science School's graduate program and got to live up in the Tetons in Grand Teton National Park. And that was an incredible experience. Really got to know the area, kind of fell in love with the Rockies, fell in love with Yellowstone and kind of that whole greater Yellowstone ecosystem where I got to live. After I finished that program, I came down to Utah State University in Logan, Utah. And that's where I'm tuning in from today. That's where I call home these days. I finished up my master's there. And while I was in grad school, I started working for NatHab. I've run most of their national park programs, as you can see from all these photos of cool places that I've been very fortunate and privileged to guide in. But I spend most of my time running our Glacier and Yellowstone programs. I'm the lead guide for all of those itineraries, and so I get to spend a lot of time right here in the Rockies. So, a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today is I'm going to briefly talk about the geography, where things are, so we're all kind of on the same page. I'll talk about why summer is such a special place in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Then I'll get into some of the logistics. I'll do a kind of a run through of a trip itinerary. I'll talk a little bit about what gear you should pack, because I know that's probably one of the big reasons why a lot of people tune into these webinars is, getting ready for their trip. And then finally, the reason why we all go on these trips, I'll talk a little bit about the wildlife at the end. So where is Yellowstone National Park? If you look at the map on the right, there's kind of a pink colored square, pinkish purplish square. That's Yellowstone National Park. But what this larger map is showing, this gray shaded area on the left, you can see that's kind of in the western part of Wyoming, part of Idaho, part of Montana. That's kind of the region of the country that we travel through on this trip because that shaded area is what we call the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So as you can imagine, things like plants and animals and natural communities, they don't adhere to man-made boundaries like park boundaries or national forests, etc. So we kind of, ecologically speaking, we've defined this greater Yellowstone ecosystem as one kind of cohesive region. And as you can see, I've superimposed the map of our itinerary for this trip onto that map, and you can see we travel through a relatively large portion of that ecosystem. But one of the really cool things is that from start to finish, we are in that ecosystem for the entire trip. So the way this trip runs, it runs two different directions. You can either start in Jackson, and we take 7 days making our way up, ending in Bozeman, or you can start in Bozeman and take 7 days, and we run the trip south and end in Jackson. The trip is the same either way. So all of the information that I'm going to give you today applies to both of those trips, whether you're going north, going south. They're the same trip, they're just flipped. But you can see the whole trip, we are in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, one of the um, best places to see wildlife in the lower 48. So why is this place so special, specifically in the summertime? So I'm very excited that NatHab now runs trips pretty much all 4 seasons. In fact, like I said, the webinar I gave last week was on our spring and fall trips. We also run winter itineraries, 7-day winter trips. But this trip that I'm talking about today is our 7-day summer itinerary. And so why should you come here in the summer? Well, the best way to put it is this is a time of high activity. And sometimes that scares people because the thing that they focus on is the human activity. There are a lot of people that go to Yellowstone, and most of them go in the summertime. That's not really a secret. That's not something that we try to sugarcoat. But there's a reason for that. One is because that's when people are on vacation in the summertime. Another reason is we're up in the high country. Some of Yellowstone, even when you're on the roads driving through, you're going to be up above 7,000, 8,000 feet. So when you're at those elevations in the Rockies, there's a lot of snow. And so a lot of times, many of the roads are only open in the summertime. So accessibility is kind of a huge thing in places in the high country like Yellowstone. So it's primarily accessible in the summertime. And then the third reason, and the one that I want to focus on, is that Yellowstone, because of some of those reasons I mentioned, a lot of the elevation, the topography, they have very long, cold, snowy winters. And there are different ways that animals and plants have adapted to those long winters. And I'm not going to get into all of the ways that all of the different organisms have adapted to those conditions, but needless to say, the summer season is when everything is active. There's kind of a race to get all of the sugar, all of the nutrients, all of the life that is in the system is kind of on full display in the summertime. So a scene like this photo that I put up that we got on a trip 2 summers ago, of a grizzly bear kind of investigating these pronghorn like in a field of wildflowers. That's a scene that you can only see in the summertime, and it kind of shows that burst of activity that happens in a relatively short amount of time. One thing we like to talk about are the different ways that animals adapt to the long, cold, snowy winters. Is Some of them migrate; they just leave. Pronghorn are one of them. Pronghorn kind of leave a lot of the areas in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. They're back in the summer, so we often see pronghorn. Bears, most of us know bears hibernate in the winter season. They're out and about in the summer, and so they're looking for food as well. Um, and then the third way, you have migrate, you have hibernate, and you have tolerate. And tolerate is kind of, the animals that we look for in the wintertime are those animals that can tolerate those conditions. But we see all of the activity of all of those different species interacting in the summertime. So another reason why summer is incredible, kind of like I said, there's kind of that burst of activity. You kind of have this amazing palette of color. In a lot of places in the country, you kind of have this series of plant life, like some flowers bloom early in the year, some bloom late. When you have such a short summer season, a lot of the wildflowers kind of all have to go at once. And so you get these really incredible bursts of color on the landscape. Another thing that adds to the color on that landscape is the bird activity. I was looking up some numbers. In the summertime, there's around 150 species of birds in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem in the summer. That number drops down to 49 year-round resident bird species. So the number of birds on the landscape kind of adds, again, to that vibrancy, to that color, to that activity. So there's a lot going on in the summertime. Another thing is the babies, the young. um, Again, going back to that contrast between a long winter and a short summer, um, a lot of the animals kind of have to have their young, pretty early in the season, and they're all just out feeding. You see a lot of really interesting play behavior in the summertime. There's just a lot of life on the landscape. From canines to ungulates, we'll be looking for those juveniles, those cute little pups and calves and fawns and red dogs. In fact, what's today? April 18th. So the canines, wolves, coyotes, foxes, they'll be having their pups right around now. Um, but they stay in the den for a little while. So usually when you start getting into that June season is when we start seeing the pups emerge from the den, and that's one of the things that we look for in the summertime. So this trip, we also spend some time exploring the geothermal areas, which, they run year round. We see them on the winter trips too. Their consistency sometimes lends to the names that they are given, like Old Faithful here, um, and also Mammoth Hot Springs. And so there are some really iconic places that we go. And this is a big part of the trip for a couple of different reasons. One I'll get into later, but one of the big reasons is just the importance of the geothermal features to the history of Yellowstone and the part that they played in conservation. And so Yellowstone was originally protected because of these unique geothermal features. And so you really can't talk about the conservation of wolves, which, is a hot topic and a conservation story that really, has had about a 30-year window, at least this latest chapter in the wolf story. But you can't have that conversation without talking about the geothermals, because Yellowstone would not be a protected place without these features. So um, there's a couple of themes that you're going to hear me and other guides talk about on the trips. One is kind of the interconnectedness of all the features of the landscape, and this is one of them. You can't talk about wildlife conservation without talking about land preservation conservation, and in Yellowstone, you can't talk about the preservation of the landscape without talking about the geothermals. So everything's connected. Okay, the activities on this trip. So this is what we would consider kind of a low activity trip, meaning there aren't as many big long hikes. We're not summiting any mountains. We do go for quite a few boardwalk walks along the geothermal areas. Sometimes we get out on a trail or two. A lot of it depends on the time of year and where the wildlife are, because our primary focus, the reason why people go on these trips, is to find the wildlife. And one of the best ways to do that is, we'll go to the hotspots. Like you can see in the top right photo, we'll be driving to different places and looking for those animals that y'all are coming to Yellowstone to see. We do have a couple kind of bonus activities when we're down in the Tetons. We're going to go on a scenic float, like you can see in the top left photo there. Along the Snake River. It's another really unique way to see the landscape and to look for more wildlife. And, if the weather cooperates, we get some pretty incredible views of the Tetons as well. And then last but not least, on the bottom right, we're going to spend some time with Dan Hartman. We usually go to his house for about an hour or two. And he's a kind of a renowned photographer and videographer. He's worked for a lot of, the big names in documentary filmmaking. And, he and his wife and his family have lived in that same cabin right in the photo there for about the last 40 years or so. I think they moved there in 89. So he's a great storyteller, and we love asking him questions about what it's like to live there year round and to be a part of that community. So that's a really enriching experience that a lot of people find is kind of a highlight. So that's kind of an overview of the things that we do on this trip. Another thing that we're really excited about is, over the last couple of years, we've been upgrading our fleet of safari vehicles. And so we have these Mercedes Sprinter vans with the pop tops, the roof hatches there. So if we get into a situation like in these photos here, where maybe there's a big bull bison wallowing just, a few feet off the side of the road, or there's a bear wandering by. We still have the opportunity to view these animals in a way that's safe for us, but also just as importantly is safe for them, because we don't want to disturb them or harass them or condition them in any way. So these vehicles allow us to do that. They have a lot of really cool customizations, specifically for these types of trips that we run. And then finally, rule number 2, everybody gets a window seat. So the way that we break up these trips, most trips, we have 2 vans, 2 guides, and usually between 10 and 13 guests, which if you do the math on that, means there's usually only about 6 or 7 people in each vehicle. So that means that everybody gets a window seat, has lots of space, and just really makes for a really comfortable, um, you know, experience even when we're driving around looking for those animals. So that's rule number 2. It's rule number 1. Rule number 1, you'll never go hungry on an at-hab trip. That's a promise that we make, and we deliver on that promise in a few different ways. One is, we know your dietary needs and preferences, and we accommodate all of those. We've never had an issue with that. Um, we have support from a field operations specialist for taking care of rule number 1. And we kind of have a mix of restaurant meals, but we also do quite a few field meals on this trip. And that's something that we really enjoy doing, not just because it's incredible experience, to eat a meal like out on the landscape, out in Yellowstone, but it allows us more time out, in the places where we're looking for wildlife. So it kind of accommodates that priority, which is seeing wildlife. So I'm going to run through an itinerary, just kind of a day by day. This is kind of a high level view. Keep in mind 2 things. Number 1 is um, it's not considered adventure travel if everything goes according to plan. That's kind of one of the 10 commandments of guiding in this industry. So things do change. But number 2 is to keep in mind that we run these trips in 2 directions. From Jackson to Bozeman would be a 7-day trip, or from Bozeman to Jackson. But again, they're the same trip, just in reverse. So all the activities are the same. So I'm going to do an example of a Jackson departure, starting in Jackson, ending in Bozeman. But if you have booked a Bozeman trip, we're going to do all of these same activities, just the order is reversed. So I hope that makes sense. So day 1. Day 1 is arrival day. If you're coming into Jackson on day 1, you'll be picked up and greeted by one of the NatHab staff. If you do arrive a day or 2 early, which I do recommend, Jackson's a really fun town. Bozeman is as well. They're both really cool, interesting, historic towns with interesting things to see. So if you are curious if you should get in a little early to explore the town, I do recommend that. If you do arrive early, just kind of arrange your own transport to town, to the hotel. But if you do come in on day 1, you'll get picked up by a guide, and we'll all meet as a group for a welcome dinner, and we'll have a presentation with a little bit more detail about what that particular week is going to entail, what the expectations are, what the plans are. We'll get to know each other a little bit. And that's day 1. All right, day 2, we're going to spend day 2 exploring Jackson Hole, Grand Teton National Park. So in the morning, you'll be out with your guides in our vans looking for wildlife. And all of us guides that work up here have kind of a network of fellow guides. We all have friends and colleagues that we use to keep a finger on the pulse of where the animals have been seen recently. We also have other resources, and we just kind of know where to look for animals at different times of the year. So we'll be seeking out different species that morning. Midday, we'll have some lunch, and then after lunch, we'll do that scenic float on the Snake River to get a beautiful view of the Tetons, and again, looking for wildlife. We're going to be looking for wildlife this whole trip, so even if I say, we're going to look for, we're going to go to geothermal areas this day, we're traveling through some of the best wildlife habitat in the lower 48 this entire trip, so wildlife opportunities are going to be basically everywhere. So after that float trip, we're going to make our way to the northern end of Grand Teton National Park, where we stay at Jackson Lake Lodge. Again, wonderful wildlife habitat right in that area. And that sets us up for day 3. Oh, another photo of that scenic float that we get to do. Day 3, we're going to head into Yellowstone. So up to this point, we've been spending our time in Grand Teton National Park. Day 3 is when we make our way into Yellowstone. We start seeing some of those geothermal features, like at West Thumb Geyser Basin on the shores of Yellowstone Lake. Our destination that day is Old Faithful, where we get to spend the night and catch some eruptions and see some really incredible landscapes. The Upper Geyser Basin, where Old Faithful is located, is the highest concentration of geysers in the world. So it doesn't even take a very long walk to just feel like you're on another planet. It's a really incredible landscape. And so I put this slide up to try to highlight. We're going to talk about crowds. Old Faithful is an iconic Yellowstone destination. There's usually a lot of people there. And so the fact that we spend the night right at Old Faithful means that we have opportunities that 99% of the visiting public don't have, and that is, we have that evening and that morning to go out and view this landscape, and so you can see this is me and my co-guide Patrick, taking an evening walk out in this place in the summertime, which can be pretty crowded during the day, and so we kind of have this really unique opportunity to get some solitude and have kind of a meaningful experience in this place that sometimes can get pretty busy. So day 4, we're going to continue exploring Yellowstone. There's a few different routes we can take. There's a few different places we can go. So your guides are going to have the most up-to-date information on where to go looking for wildlife on this day. And it's really, we explore a large portion of the park, and we get to see some incredible landscapes and hopefully see some incredible wildlife as well. We're going to end day 4 near the north entrance of the park, up in the Mammoth Hot Springs Gardner area, where we're going to spend the next 2 nights, and that sets us up beautifully for our day 5 adventure. And so day 5, we're going to head through the northern range, which the northern range is a term used for kind of the whole northern region of Yellowstone. And we're going to head into the Lamar Valley. We're going to be looking for all of the large carnivores, bison. Again, in the middle of summer, you can see anything. Everything's kind of fair game. Everything's out and about looking for food. Early season, you have a lot of behavior with young animals. Late season, you have some of that breeding and rut behavior. So we're going to be in some prime wildlife habitat. The Lamar Valley and the Northern Range are called the American Serengeti. It's one of the largest or highest concentrations of large mammals in the lower 48. So really the opportunities for viewing wildlife are incredible. This is also the day where we're going to chat with Dan Hartman. We usually do that early afternoon, kind of the heat of the day when some of the wildlife might be a little bit quieter. We take about an hour or 2 to spend some time with him. And that leaves the afternoon and evening free to continue looking for wildlife as we make our way back to our hotel near the north entrance of the park. Day 6, we have kind of another chunk of time in the morning that, depending on what we've seen up to that point in the trip, your guides can kind of target one species or the other. We can go different places. You can kind of, you get the gist that we leave some wiggle room in this itinerary because wildlife can be unpredictable, and sometimes the best thing we can do is, the night before, be like, oh, I had a friend that saw a grizzly bear in Hayden Valley, so we're going to go look for that grizzly bear because it probably hasn't gone far. So we try to allow for that flexibility so the expertise of the guides can come through to really create these amazing opportunities to see the things that you all want to see on these trips. About midday, early afternoon, we're going to start making our way north towards Bozeman, and that includes a drive through Paradise Valley, which is outside of the park. But again, we're still within that greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So the wildlife viewing opportunities continue all the way up to Bozeman. We'll get to Bozeman, we'll get checked into the hotel, and that's where we'll have kind of our last group dinner together, our farewell dinner um, before day 7, which we'll get you all off to the airport or wherever you need to be to get on your next adventure. So okay, let's take a few minutes and talk about gear. So this lovely couple I got to take out a couple years ago up to Yellowstone. These are my parents. And so you can see here they're kind of dressed for that warm summer weather, baseball cap, sun shirt. But on that same trip, you can see conditions changed. You can see, rain layers, warm hats. And so this kind of highlights, these two slides kind of highlight just that range of conditions we can have even on a single trip. So kind of regardless of when you book a trip to Yellowstone, I really don't change this slide very much because mountain weather can be unpredictable. You can easily have, 40 plus degree swings from when we get started in the morning to the heat of the day. And so what that means is layers are really important because layers are the best way to be prepared for kind of those changing conditions. I usually recommend what's called the base mid shell system, and that's basically 3 layers. One is your base layer. In the wintertime and other seasons, I would say long underwear is a good base layer. Summertime, you could probably get away with, kind of maybe a t-shirt and, regular underwear. But having a good mid layer might be hiking pants, maybe a fleece or a sweatshirt or a flannel, something, long sleeve. And then having that shell layer is really important. I recommend rain layer, both rain pants and rain coat, because those are pretty lightweight layers that you can kind of stuff in the bottom of your pack. And even if it's not raining, but let's say it gets a little cold or windy, those are lightweight layers that you can throw on for a little bit added warmth, a little bit added protection from those elements. I definitely recommend a warm hat and gloves, even on a summer trip, because again, those mornings can be pretty chilly, pretty frosty, especially when we're in places like Old Faithful, where we're up above 7,000 feet. And so nighttime and morning temperatures can get pretty chilly. You also want to be bringing a day pack, a water bottle. I think NatHab sends folks a water bottle before the trip. Make sure you bring that. Camera obviously is optional. Most people use their phones, and that's fine. I'll be bringing along a camera, and I'll talk about photography here in a minute. Feel free to bring that along. Sun protection, and what I mean by that is, sun hat, baseball cap, something to protect yourself from that high elevation sun. Because even when it's cooler out, if it's a sunny day, being at elevation means the air is a little bit thinner, and so that radiant heat can be a little more harsh. And so we want to protect folks from, getting sunburn and skin damage. So what do you not need to bring? Things that we provide optics. And what I mean by that is binoculars and spotting scopes. Because, these are big landscapes, and sometimes we do see animals at a distance. And so we have the necessary tools that when we do see an animal a long ways away, we can still set up our scopes and we can still watch that animal, and we don't want to influence those animals' behavior. So that's one way that we can watch these animals, behave the way they normally behave in their natural habitat. So we also provide trekking poles. So you do not need to bring those unless you have a pair that you really like and you would prefer to bring. And then sunscreen. We also make sure we have sunscreen because again, that high elevation sun can be harsher than most people expect. So let's talk about photography for a minute. 2 points I want to cover. One is, what do I bring? I have one camera body. I bring 2 lenses. I bring a landscape lens, and I bring a telephoto lens for wildlife. Because as you can see from these photos, especially on the bottom right, We have some incredible photography opportunities, including some beautiful landscapes, but also hopefully some really good wildlife opportunities as well. So again, I bring two different lenses to use for those two different situations. We do run photography specific trips, and if that's something that you're interested in, talk to your adventure specialist about that, because we do go to Yellowstone, and we run photography trips, specifically for getting those kind of iconic shots. It's a place where you can practice photography skills and learn more from really experienced photography guides. So again, ask your adventure specialist about those opportunities if that's something that you're interested in. Your guides, even on our nature safaris, the ones that are not photography specific, will still be snapping photos throughout the trip. And one of the reasons that we do that kind of gets into the second thing that I want to talk about, and that is the photo sharing platform that we have on the adventure portal that I think is an incredible tool that I personally love. Um, because, and this isn't just, a plug for NatHab. I think it's a really incredible tool that makes our trips better, and here's why. So when you travel, when you go on a trip, it flies by. I've traveled enough. I've traveled with people that, the days go by quickly. We pack them full. And so sometimes people feel the stress of trying to capture, every moment, every animal we see, every mountain, every, waterfall, and sometimes that stress and anxiety about feeling like you have to capture everything as you're moving through kind of takes away from being present in that moment and kind of having that experience and connecting with that place or that animal. And so, what the photo sharing platform does is it allows us to kind of share all our photos. Everybody on the trip can contribute photos to this platform, and we can all, use and share those photos. And so what that means is if you have, 15 people over the course of 7 days, um, I hope that people don't feel the need to experience all 7 days through a lens, um, because hopefully that they have faith that their guides and their fellow travelers, somebody is going to get that shot that we're going to share with everybody at the end of the trip. So I think it's really meaningful. I think it's really helpful, and I think it allows for people um, to be present, to be in the moment, and it helps to connect with the place. And I think that's really kind of one of the goals as a guide, um, is to kind of facilitate that connection. So anyway, I'm really excited about that tool. And again, if you have questions about photography, feel free to ask away. Okay, so the last section of my speech here, let's talk a little bit about the wildlife. So wildlife, um, unpredictable. They don't they don't stay still. We'll talk at length on these trips about the different things that they do at different times of the year, which makes them fascinating. It makes guiding fun. It makes guiding challenging because they're doing different things all the time. So we're never going to guarantee wildlife. That's not something we can do. But your guides are pretty good at what they do, and they know why people book these trips. And trust me, I can almost guarantee that nobody wants to see these animals more than your guide does. So we put a lot of effort into finding these animals. But again, no guarantees. But what are some of the animals that we hope or we expect to see on these trips? Number one is birds. I kind of talked earlier about how the summer season is a really vibrant time to see bird activity because there are birds that move into the greater Yellowstone ecosystem that are not there in the wintertime. And so we see more bird activity, and that includes raptors and songbirds and waterfowl, as you can see in these photos. So there's some really incredible species, and we'll be keeping our eyes peeled for them. And if you get a trip with Patrick, shout out to Patrick. He's the bird expert. So, all right. So what is going on in this slide? A lot of people think it's kind of interesting that I include this in my wildlife section because it This is a photo of the outflow of a geothermal feature. And it just looks like rocks. A lot of people, when I ask, like, oh, what gives it the color? I do kind of a question and answer educational moment, and most people say, like, oh, it must be iron or some type of mineral in the rock here. Um, that is incorrect. This is actually organisms. The color in these outflows, the browns that you see, some of the yellows and oranges and reds, those are all different microorganisms. Some are bacteria, some are cyanobacteria, archaea, algae. There is kind of a whole food web going on in these kind of micro ecosystems. And so there are even little endemic flies that hang around. And this photo was taken in the wintertime. So these systems are going year round just because of the geology and the hydrology and the heat from the outflow of these geothermal features. So when we talk about geothermals, we're going to talk about wildlife too, because there are these really unique communities of organisms that a lot of people, when they visit Yellowstone without a guide, they kind of walk right by and they don't really realize, how interesting and unique these places and these organisms are. So that's one thing that we talk about on this trip. All right, bears. If you go with me on a winter trips are incredible. They're exciting. They're a lot of fun. But I always kind of tongue in cheek lament, like, unfortunately, no bears this time of year. So that's one of the reasons why I get really excited about guiding Yellowstone in the summertime, is because the bears are out and they're active. They're looking for food. They're looking for mates. They're taking care of their cubs. We get to see a lot of really interesting activity in the summertime, and that includes bear activity when we get the fortunate opportunity to see it. The Greater Yellowstone ecosystem has two species of bear. This is a black bear. A few different ways you can tell them apart. I won't get too deep into that right now. But there's also grizzly bears, like this mama and two cubs. You can see the two cubs kind of hiding in the sagebrush back there. And so in the summertime, they're both active. There's some overlap in their habitat, so we we have the opportunity to see both species throughout the trip, but we're going to be looking for black bears sometimes in different habitats and natural communities than we look for grizzly bears. And that's what makes bears really interesting, really unique, because their life histories are just interesting. They're kind of dictated by food because they sleep half the year, and when they're awake, they're trying to fatten up for, the coming winter. And again, kind of that long, cold winter dictates a lot of the behavior of the animals, even in the summertime, including the bears that we hopefully will see. All right, here's a couple of moose. We got a cow and a calf on the right and a young bull on the left there. And moose are another fascinating animal. A lot of really interesting adaptations for the habitats where they look for food, where they spend the winter. A really interesting animal, really unique animal. And we have a few different spots on this trip where we'll be looking for moose, especially down in Jackson Hole. But kind of throughout the ecosystem, the fires that happen, we're going to talk at length about fires on this trip because that's such an important factor that kind of shapes the landscape. And so the fires that have happened over the last few decades has kind of shifted where the moose are, because I don't want to say they have really specific needs as an animal, but they definitely have preferences. They definitely like wet areas and riparian habitats, and there's a reason why we call them swamp donkeys, because that's kind of the habitat where they like to hang out. And fires have kind of changed that a little bit. All right, let's talk about canines for a second. So, 3 canines in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. You got your red fox. We saw those fox kits on an earlier slide. This one here is the coyote, and you're gonna hear me kind of rant and rave about coyotes because I love them. They're a fascinating animal. Their conservation story is also very unique, basically because we haven't really needed to try to conserve them. In fact, the opposite, we've tried to get rid of them so many different times in so many different ways, and they're doing better than ever. Their population is booming, their range is expanding, and so it's an interesting species to talk about because of the similarities to wolves and the contrasts between those two stories. So again, fascinating animal, and you can't really talk about coyotes in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem without talking about their big older, I shouldn't say older, their big cousin, the gray wolf. And gray wolves, incredible animal. Their social dynamics are so similar to humans that that has played into the story of the wolves in North America, because they it's hard to find somebody who is neutral about wolves. Aaron Bott and Nat Hab put together that short film called The Big Bad Wolf. I highly recommend everybody go watch it, because they kind of talk about how wolves, uh, we see so much of ourselves in wolves because of the way that they behave, and because of the competition for some of the same resources that we've had with them. Um, and so fascinating, incredible conservation story, especially in Yellowstone. And, that's one of the reasons why a lot of people come to Yellowstone these days, is to look for wolves. And it's tough to find them. Not gonna lie. There's about 100 wolves in Yellowstone, and Yellowstone is 2.2 million acres. And but we try hard, and we usually do a pretty good job. That's definitely a priority on these trips, is to go out there looking for wolves, and that's something that your guides are going to be working very hard to make that happen, because they're just an incredible animal. They really can move people, and I think I'm going to leave it at that. And with this last slide, this curious little red dog, this baby bison, I'm going to open it up to some questions.
Oh, that was so good, Jake. I wish I was joining a trip with you. This looks like an amazing itinerary in the field. Great, everybody. In the control panel, you have the option there to type in some questions. So go ahead, whatever you have, I will get through as many as I can, and we will start going through everything. While Jake was talking, actually, I am getting quite a few questions asking about the National Park Service. So what I did while Jake was talking, I actually reached out to the trip owner, and I'm just going to read you all his response. That way we can just get that out of the way and go back into the Q&A. So let me do that real fast, everybody. So he said there is still a lot of unknowns with the budget cuts, and we are keeping a close eye on that. That said, we are a self-contained operation and do not rely solely on park staff to run our trips. The lodges and restaurants in the park are operated by third parties and remain open. We have and exercise the ability to reduce the burden on the park staff by leave no trace principles. So there you go, everybody. We are on it. I think is essentially what he is saying there. We're going to be
Brooke, can I
running
jump in?
as usual. Go right ahead, Jake. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm going to piggyback off that. And this is something that I usually talk about in our welcome presentations. But one thing, so NatHab has a really great relationship with the parks and the communities where we guide. And a big part of that is our guests, the people that go on our trips, are role model visitors. They're role model tourists. Our ethics towards wildlife and towards other people are, we set the bar very high, and that's something that the guides will talk about at the welcome presentation. And I think if you are concerned as a visitor to one of these parks about making a positive impact on these places, I think that is the best way that we can do that going forward, because there might not be a strong national park presence to, say, enforce regulations to keep people safe. And so our behavior, as role model visitors around animals and around safety and around leaving no trace, that's how we can make that impact. And so if you've booked a trip, that's something your guides are going to talk about, and that's something that I would love for you to have in your mind as you are making plans to visit these places over the next year or two.
Yes, very good point, Jake. Thank you so much for saying that on the back of Corbin's response. So that was perfect. Alrighty, let's get back to the questions here. All right, Jake, I have a lot of questions about footwear. What should
Sure.
people put on their feet?
Yeah, something comfortable. Um, so, like I said, we're not going to do a ton of hiking. So I don't think you need to, go buy a pair of $500 leather hiking boots that go up to your knees. We're not, climbing the Matterhorn. So something that is comfortable that you can be in all day, getting in and out of vehicles, maybe walking a mile or so around a boardwalk. I usually wear trail runners, which are basically a sneaker that is built for rough terrain. So they usually have a pretty good tread on them. So yeah, I think comfort is key. You don't necessarily need something big, heavy, sturdy. I'd go for something more comfortable.
Great, thanks for that. Next, how are bathroom breaks handled?
Hmm. Yeah, a lot of places, a lot of bathroom breaks. So I mentioned I was a forklift driver for about 10 years. I worked for a coffee company, and I still am a pretty strong addict. So we stop plenty of times when we're out in the park. Most of those toilets are going to be pit toilets, outhouse type toilets. Usually our nice warm running water restrooms are going to be at the beginning of the day, the end of the day, occasionally at a restaurant for lunch. But usually when we're out in the field, it's going to be pit toilets, but there are plenty of them, and we definitely stop plenty throughout the day.
Awesome. Next, could you elaborate on the mosquito situation? Are they bad at all? Should people bring repellent?
No, when I've lived in that area, there were a few spots that got pretty bad. The last couple of years that I've been guiding up there, we always have bug spray on us, so you don't have to bring your own. We usually keep a DEET and a non-DEET option because people do have preferences there. But we rarely use it. I've actually been pleasantly surprised the last few years that I don't think I've really worn it at all the last few years. Um, the temperature has to be kind of perfect for them, and you kind of have to be in wetter areas, and it's a pretty dry place. It's kind of a high desert, so not really a huge deal.
Awesome. Next, I have a lot of questions about seasonality. Could you maybe put some like months to different seasons? What's considered winter, spring, summer, fall?
Sure. Yeah, if you want to watch my webinar from last week, I talk a little bit in more detail about uh, answering that question because we now run trips in what we call the spring, which I would say May and June are kind of the spring seasons. Again, winters are very long. Fall is kind of September, October, because it usually starts snowing pretty regularly in October. So July and August. So if you think about, let's see, I got to do the math here. May, June, spring, July, August, summer, September, October, fall. The rest of it's winter. That's when the roads close. So I think if you kind of think of it in those 2 month chunks, that's probably the best way to do it. If you're interested in seeing wildflowers and baby animals, earlier in the season, you're going to get a little bit more of that. The height of the activity is going to be in the summer months, because those young animals are now big enough that they're out, playing around with the herds. The wolves are in the rendezvous site, so they're usually visible. Then into fall, you start to get some of that breeding behavior with the ungulates, which are the hooved animals. So some of that rut behavior with the um, moose and elk and bison going to be a little bit later season. So there's something to see regardless of when you come. But if you do have a priority, that's kind of how I would break up the season.
Awesome. All right. Next, we have some photography questions here. Do do we provide any monopods or tripods?
No, we have tripods for our scopes, but they're pretty well dedicated for those scopes. If you want to bring along a monopod or a tripod, we do have enough room in the vans to accommodate that. Like I said, we only put 6 or 7 people in each vehicle, so you do have room for little extra equipment. But no, we don't provide those. I don't think they do on photography trips. I haven't run one in a few years. But I don't think we provide those. You can bring your own though. Feel free to do so.
Great. And then if anybody is interested in landscape shots, we all know the Tetons are some of the most photogenic mountains out there. What type of lenses would you recommend somebody bring?
Sure. I have a Sony mirrorless camera. My landscape lens is an 18 to 135, and I find that that's very versatile for most landscape and portrait shots, even some wildlife if they're not too far away. I love that lens. I keep that on, more than half the time. And again, that's an 18 to 135 millimeter, and seems to work great for all the landscape shots that I've been taking.
Great. Um, Perfect here. Okay, we have some more popping in, which is great. Uh, will we be going off road at all, or will we be staying on paved highways?
We'll go on some dirt roads. There's a couple secret spots that your guides know about, to try to get us away from some of those well-traveled areas and crowds. They're not extensive, you know. But yeah, there's a few dirt roads that might have a few bumps on them, but I wouldn't call it off-roading. It's just um, bumpy dirt roads here and there. Primarily paved roads though.
Awesome. If somebody's interested in buying souvenirs or local crafts, will there be opportunities along this trip to do that?
Sure. Yeah, plenty of those. There's an organization called Yellowstone Forever, which is the nonprofit partner of the park, and we encourage folks to buy from them because they have wonderful gift shops, and that money goes back into conservation efforts in the park. I think all the places that we stay also have gift shops. They are mostly run by Xanterra, so that's kind of going, that's a large business. But they sometimes have, cool souvenirs. But we definitely recommend supporting the park by buying from Yellowstone Forever, and we do stop at a lot of those stores.
Fantastic. I do have a couple questions about people who might want to drive. Could you explain how that might work? Since
Hmm.
this starts and ends in different places, how should people think about getting to the start and leaving from the trip?
Yeah, no, that can be challenging. Not gonna lie. Your best bet probably would be to fly back to your destination. There is a bus system called Salt Lake Express that run a bus, between those two locations. There might be some other buses. I'm not familiar. I'm only familiar with that one company, but that can be a little tricky. I would make sure that you plan that in advance, just because you don't want to drive to Jackson, end up at Bozeman, and be like, oh, now I have to get back to Jackson. Just be prepared with those travel plans ahead of time. But I think both of those destinations have airports, so flying is an option, and I believe Salt Lake Express runs between those two as well.
Awesome. What type of luggage can people bring? Should it be all cloth like a duffel, or could it be more popular hard shell one? What should people pack their stuff in?
Yeah, so we recommend soft-sided luggage. It's a little bit easier, to pack because we will be shuttling your luggage between different destinations, different hotels and accommodations. So soft-sided is ideal. We've found that the best way to do it is, to basically have two bags, very similar to like flying on an airplane, where you have a large check bag and then kind of your carry-on or your day pack. And so that system seems to work pretty well to have, a soft-sided but large, luggage that you're not going to see all day because that kind of goes with our field operations specialist to the next hotel, and then just have your carry-on, backpack, that you keep with you all the time. Um, if you have more questions about that, there is a pre-departure briefing that you should be getting if you book a trip, and that goes into a little bit more detail about luggage recommendations.
Awesome. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the pace of the day and maybe how it changes depending on the season? So, like, what is the average wake up time? What is the average let's get out and go in the vans? We're going to go find some cool stuff, evening times.
Yeah,
Yeah, but yeah, if you talk a little bit more about that, that'd be great.
sure. The short answer is they are busy days, especially in the summer months, just because the days are long. The wildlife is most active at dawn and dusk. We try to kind of alternate early mornings with um, not so early mornings. So we might have a couple of mornings on the trip where there are activities that start at about 5:30. I know at least one of those will probably be optional if you want to sleep in. Um, the rest of the mornings will probably get started around breakfast time, 7 to 8. Um, but again, we try to balance that because obviously getting out earlier, we have better opportunities of seeing things and beating crowds. But we also don't want to just run everybody ragged. So we try to stagger early mornings with more reasonable mornings. But they are action packed days. We're out all day. Um, because Yellowstone's a big park, and 7 days, might seem like a sufficient time to see a lot. But there's a lot to see.
Fantastic. And a little further detail into that. Around how much time would you say the average time is spent in a van per day, getting from one point to the other, or looking for wildlife?
Sure. Yeah, we keep our drives pretty short. If you were to look at the beginning of a day and our destination at the end of the day, you might see, let's see, maybe an hour or two if we were just to drive from point A to point B. But except for the very last drive that we do, which is about an hour and a half up to Bozeman, we break up those drives because, again, we're going through wildlife habitat, we're going through beautiful scenery. So we never drive for really extended periods of time. I think, God, I don't want to make any promises, but I don't think we have any drives more than an hour, except for that very final drive up to Bozeman. So yeah, we break things up because there's just so much to see.
Could not agree more. This area is just like a playground for all of us nature lovers. It is amazing, amazing destination. Well, all right, everybody, I will go ahead and close up the Q&A portion. If you are booked on this trip and have more questions, please reach out to the concierge team. They would be more than happy to help you. And then, of course, if you are curious about booking the trip, reach out to your adventure specialist. They'd be more than happy to get you all set up and answer your questions. So, Jake, I would love to turn it to you for any last closing comments.
Yeah, all I can say is I love this area for so many different reasons. I'm so excited that NatHab is running trips year round because, kind of like I've been harping on this week and last week, there's so much to see regardless of when you go. Um, it's busy in the summertime, but don't let that scare you off because it's such an incredible place in the summertime, and your guides know how to handle that. So I hope to see you all this summer.
Awesome, Jake. I'm sure you're going to have a fantastic season, and I'm so excited for everybody going this year. Again, thank you, Jake, and I'd like to thank everybody who tuned in. Join us Monday for our next daily dose of nature. You can check out next week's lineup, including registration links on our website at nathab.com/webinars, and keep an eye out for our Sunday e-news announcement. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.